All right, so here we go with conservation biology. Conservation biology, in the big picture of biological fields, is fairly young. For most of human existence, we never thought about these things. We never worried about depleting our natural resources, over consuming things, destroying the environment, all those things that we seriously have to consider and look at in today's world. When the human population was just kind of muddling along, we didn't have that much of an impact upon the natural environment. But as human population has exponentially grown to, we're 8 billion people, or soon to be 8 billion people, maybe even 10 in the next 20 to 30 years, we have to focus on this. Our natural resources are disappearing. We are losing vast amounts of biodiversity on this planet, and all of that plays an integral role in the survival of the human species. That is the toughest challenge for anybody who is pursuing conservation or ecology, is convincing people why nature is important and how nature impacts us. Most often humans step back and say, well, yeah, it's sad the polar bears are getting pushed towards extinction, but what does that really mean to me? When species go into extinction, we lose something, and there is a rippling effect that's coming back to the human population. So those are the things we're going to talk about. But what conservation biology does is it pulls together all of the ecology ideas and all those connections. It even brings in areas of molecular biology, genetics, phylogenies, all the topics you should have been covering or have covered and should hopefully be familiar with throughout biology comes together in conservation. And we use all of these different sub-disciplines of biology for this field. So even if you're saying, I'm not into ecology, I love the molecular stuff, you can play a huge role in conservation biology with molecular contributions. Don't be surprised if a conservation biologist comes to you and says, I need a DNA sequence of these animals, these plants, to understand, are these the same species? Are these different species? Everything ties together and accumulates into conservation biology. So I encourage you guys, be more familiar with it. Those of you heading towards medical school, fantastic opportunities. Where are your medicines coming from? Yeah, they're making them in a lab. What's the origin? The origin is in nature. The origin is sitting out there in that rainforest or on that coral reef. That's where the new medicines come from. Then we synthesize them in the laboratory to use in the pharmaceutical industry. But we lose that nature, we lose those medicines, we lose those drugs, we lose those cures for diseases that are afflicting people. All right, so this is what conservation is all about. So let's take a look at it. The concern with conservation, the big concern right now, is that species diversity is just crashing at a scary, scary rate. So we're estimated to lose 10 to 20% of species diversity within the next 20 to 30, maybe we could stretch it to 50 years. So you think about that. 10 to 20% of the species on this earth will disappear in our lifetimes. So where will you be at in life in 20 years? Hopefully fully, into a career, you got your job going, your profession, you're doing well, maybe you have a family. 10% fewer species on this planet. How many songbirds will have disappeared? How many amphibians? How many plants? How many things we don't even see? That is what is happening. So imagine during the course of this lecture, I sent somebody over to your house, and while you're listening to the lecture, they took off 10% of the parts of your car. Said, here's the address. This is their car. Go remove 10% of the parts. Would you feel comfortable driving that car to work, to school, to go see your friends, to go out shopping for dinner, whatever you're going to do? Getting in a vehicle knowing 10%, maybe 20% of the pieces have been removed. You know, if it's a mirror, yeah, I don't care. I don't use it anyway. But what if it's a brake line? What if it's the bolt that holds or the nut that holds the tire onto your car and those have been removed? Go take a drive, go down the interstate, go 70 miles an hour, knowing those pieces have been removed. That is the concept that we need to recognize. We're losing species that are critical to our survival. So it's not a new thing, though. This is the sad part. It's not a new thing. Humans have been doing this since humans became humans, since the evolution of the human species. We have been pushing species into extinction. We go back throughout this, the growth and development of the human species. We've been doing it. In prehistoric times, humans, when they came to North America, we pushed, the estimations range between 74 to 86% of the big animals. That's what megafauna means, big animals. The giant sloth, the saber-toothed cat, the big bears. We pushed them into extinction. Our species, our prehistoric ancestors were able to do that. And the two main reasons, the two factors that did this at that time were hunting and burning and clearing of forests, habitat destruction. That's what pushed these species into extinction. They didn't know to run away from a human. They didn't have defensive mechanisms against humans. They got pushed into extinction. There's plenty of anthropological evidence where humans would drive herds of mammoths over cliffs for hunting. That's how they hunted. They would force them over a cliff to kill them. And you'd have an entire herd of mammoths dead at the bottom of a cliff. 30, 40, 50 animals. It's not like people could eat all of that. Not when you have a band of maybe 20 or 30 humans doing it. Okay, 30 humans couldn't even eat one mammoth before the meat would spoil. Yet you have an entire herd at the bottom of a cliff that are dead. So we overhunted and killed and pushed these species into extinction. We're still doing it today. The challenge is our population has grown and we're doing it at a much greater rate, much faster speed than what our prehistoric ancestors did. So you take a look at recorded extinctions since 1600, excuse me, and these are what we know of. And these are the big things: mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, invertebrates, flowering plants. Some of these things we're guessing, especially the invertebrates. How many species have gone extinct that we've never recorded, that we didn't even recognize? Most of the records are on the mainland because obviously that's easiest to study. We do have islands, and you'll notice, let me do the circle here, island extinctions are significantly greater than what we see on the mainland when we look at percentages and things like that. Because island extinctions, it's much easier to push a species into extinction when it's on an island. Ocean, well, it's really tough to truly say is a species extinct in the oceans of the world, but there are a handful. So again, you start going, wow, that's pretty scary. How many species have we pushed into extinction? And then what is the rippling effect? So go back to community ecology here, and you have species A that connects to all these different species. You know, you got species here, 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 etc. And when this one goes extinct, then that ripples here, here, pressures this one, that one, that one, that one, that one. How many other things go extinct or populations suffer because of the extinction of one. It's the domino effect or the ripple effect. Okay, so when we're looking at species, we will use the term, and I want you to be familiar with this one, endemic species. So you'll see that term. Endemic means a species that is found in only a specific region. So it's unique to a community. Let's keep it at that. Okay. Most of the time, endemics have a very limited range. Oh. They live in one area of the world, and that's it. So we want to be very careful when we're looking at habitat destruction, changing an environment. Are there endemic species there? If they are, you know you're going to push them to extinction. It's not like, oh, well, you know, there's like 2 million of these in Indiana, so if they disappear in Illinois, big deal. We got plenty in Indiana. We can even use the Indiana ones to rebuild the Illinois population if necessary. If they're only found in Illinois and you push them to extinction in Illinois, they're gone. There is no backup plan. There's no plan B. So that is an important, very, very important concept to understand and term to apply to a species. Is it a global species? Is it a US based? Is it an Illinois based, etc.? So this is where understanding species diversity, their life history, all these things become important when we're dealing with endemic species. So the example here, this Manua Key silver sword type of plant lives on one volcanic crater in Hawaii, on the island of Hawaii. That's it. Nowhere else in the world. So if you lose that population, gone. But again, what's the consequence? Do I care if I lose that population? I didn't need that wire in the dashboard of my car. It's a big deal. Do I realize and understand the importance of it? And some things obviously have greater significance than others. Just depends upon the species. But everything is connected. That's what I will continue to stress throughout all this conservation topic and lecture. Everything is connected. You can't remove a species without impacting others. So again, back to food chains and food webs. No species exists independent of others because of food. And usually there's multiple things everything requires as a source of food. One animal eats probably 20 different species. So if that primary animal disappears, there's 20 other species that will feel an impact. So what we'll do with conservation is take a look at regions of the earth known as hotspots. Hotspots are areas that contain the greatest biodiversity on Earth. So what we often look for is do these areas have large numbers of endemic species? And they get designated as global hotspots. Say, okay, this particular region here, this region there, the map gives you a general feel for it. Those are hotspots that have been identified globally. And the challenge is, if you look at a lot of them, they are in developing countries where we see the greatest population growth of humans and the greatest pressure on natural resources. So hotspots are areas that we really want to prioritize when we talk about conservation and preservation of habitat and things like that. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at and survey different parts of the world, and this is primarily terrestrial. We do have aquatic hotspots, and say, okay, this is what's going on with the hotspots. So we'll talk more about hotspots and conservation in the next part of the lecture.